The night April Bush almost lost everything began with the cry of a child she didn't even know. The sound cut through the air at Bella Sera, an elegant Italian restaurant in the heart of Manhattan where April had been working for just 3 months. It was her second job of the day. In the morning she served coffee and donuts in Brooklyn. At night she carried heavy trays of fresh pasta and expensive wine to customers who left tips larger than her weekly salary. Her feet hurt, her back hurt. But April couldn't stop. Not when she had bills to pay and a sick grandmother who depended on her. The crying started softly, then grew louder. A little girl, no more than 3 years old, sat at a table in the most secluded corner of the restaurant. Dark brown hair in delicate curls, a light pink dress embroidered with flowers. Tears streamed down her face as she screamed words in Italian that April couldn't quite understand. Beside her, a man wearing a tailored black suit tried to calm her, but the child pulled away from him, refusing to be comforted. April recognized the man, Alessandro Morone. Everyone in the restaurant knew that name. He came there every week, always at the same isolated table, always surrounded by large men in dark suits who stood nearby like watchful statues. The other waiters whispered about him, about the power he wielded, about how no one should ask questions or look him in the eye for too long. But on this night, Alessandro Morone didn't seem powerful. He seemed desperate. The girl, Chiara, April heard him call her, pushed her plate of pasta away, knocking over a glass of juice that stained the white tablecloth. She screamed louder, a high-pitched, broken sound that made other customers turn their heads uncomfortably. Alessandro's security guards exchanged tense glances. The restaurant manager Marco approached nervously, his hands shaking as he tried to decide whether to intervene. April watched everything from the kitchen door, holding an empty tray against her chest. She saw the frustration on Alessandro's face, but she also saw something deeper, pain. A pain she recognized because she had felt it herself, the pain of not knowing how to help someone you love more than your own life. Something inside April stirred. Maybe it was exhaustion lowering her defenses. Maybe it was the memory of her own childhood when she cried like this after her mother abandoned her. Or maybe it was simply the fact that she couldn't bear to see a child suffer like that. Before she could think better of it, April set the tray on an empty table and walked over to Alessandro Morone's table. The security guards immediately blocked her path. One of them, a huge man with a scar on his forehead, placed his hand on her chest. "Step away," he said, his voice deep as thunder. "Please," April said, looking past him at Alessandro. "I just want to help." Alessandro looked up, and for the first time, April saw his face up close. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with angular features and dark brown eyes that carried the weight of 1,000 difficult decisions. There were shadows under those eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. He studied April for a long moment, then nodded to the guard to step aside. "Do you think you can do what a dozen nannies couldn't?" Alessandro asked, his voice carrying a soft but menacing Italian accent. April swallowed hard. She was treading on dangerous ground, and she knew it. But when she looked at Chiara, at those red, swollen eyes, at those little hands clenched into tight fists, she couldn't back down. "I know what it's like to lose someone when you're too young to understand why," April said softly. "I know how much it hurts when the world no longer makes sense." Something shifted in Alessandro's face. The hardness wavered for a split second. He stepped back slightly, giving April room to approach. April knelt down beside Chiara's chair, bringing herself to the girl's eye level. She didn't try to touch her right away. She didn't try to stop the crying or say that everything would be okay. Instead, she just stayed there, quiet and present, letting Chiara feel whatever she needed to feel. "I know you're angry," April said softly in English, though she wasn't sure Chiara fully understood, but the tone mattered more than the words. "I know you want your mum, and it's okay to feel that. You can cry as much as you want." Chiara sobbed harder, but her crying changed. It became less frantic, deeper. The anger was turning into something purer. Sadness. April slowly reached out her hand, letting it rest on the table near Chiara, an offer without pressure. "Your mum loved you very much," April continued. "She still loves you, wherever she is. And she wouldn't want you to be alone with all this pain. She would want someone to hold you. Kiara looked at April's hand. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she placed her small hand over April's. Her fingers were warm and sticky with tears and orange juice. April felt her heart tighten. "Can I hug you?" April asked. Kiara didn't respond with words. Instead, she slid off her chair and threw herself into April's arms, burying her face in her uniform and crying with a force that made her whole small body shake. April held her tightly, rocking her gently, murmuring comforting words in English and the few words of Italian she knew. "Sta ben! Sta ben!" The restaurant fell silent. The other customers watched with wide eyes. The security guards looked shocked. Marco, the manager, had tears in his eyes, but April was focused only on Kiara. She continued to hold the girl as the sobs gradually subsided, until Kiara was no longer crying, just breathing deeply and unevenly against April's shoulder. When April finally looked up, Alessandro Moroni was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher: admiration, gratitude, and something more dangerous: interest. "What's your name?" he asked. "April Bush," she replied, her voice hoarse. "April," he repeated as if testing the name, "you have a gift." April shook her head. "It's not a gift, it's just empathy. Anyone can do it if they really pay attention." "But most people don't pay attention," Alessandro said. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her with unsettling intensity. "Kiara hasn't let anyone touch her since her mother died. Not even me. Especially not me. But you reached her in minutes." April felt Kiara snuggle closer to her, her little fingers clutching the fabric of April's uniform, as if afraid to let her go. "She just needs to know she's not alone," April said. "That someone understands." Alessandro was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that would change April's life forever. "I want to hire you." April blinked. "Excuse me?" "To take care of Kiara," Alessandro clarified. 3 days a week. I'll pay you $10,000 a week." April felt the blood drain from her face. $10,000. That was more than she earned in 3 months working 2 grueling jobs. I'm not a professional nanny," she stammered. "I don't need a professional," Alessandro said. "I need someone who really cares, someone who sees my daughter as a person, not as a job." He paused. "Think about it. You don't have to decide now." But April was already deciding. She thought of her grandmother, in the expensive nursing home that April could barely afford. She thought of the medical bills piling up, the sleepless nights worrying about money. She thought of how long she could really keep working 2 jobs before her body gave out completely. And then she looked at Kiara, who had lifted her head and was staring at April with huge, vulnerable eyes, as if silently begging April not to leave. "I accept," April said. Alessandro smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it completely transformed his face. For a moment, he didn't look like a dangerous man. He just looked like a grateful father. "Great," he said. "My driver will pick you up tomorrow at 9 in the morning. We'll discuss the details." That night, as April walked back to her small apartment in the Bronx, she couldn't stop thinking about how strange it all was. She had agreed to work for Alessandro Moroni, a man who, people whispered, was one of the most powerful Mafia bosses in New York, a man whose name made other grown men sweat. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she didn't see a monster. She saw a broken father holding his crying daughter, utterly powerless to fix the one thing that mattered. April didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, wondering if she had just made the best decision of her life or the worst. The next morning, a shiny black Mercedes pulled up in front of her building at exactly 9 o'clock. The driver, a middle-aged man with an expressionless face, opened the door for her without saying a word. April got into the car, her heart beating so hard she was sure the driver could hear it. They drove for 40 minutes, leaving Manhattan and entering the lush suburbs of Westchester County. The houses grew larger, the streets grew cleaner. And then they turned into a tall iron gate that opened automatically, revealing a property so vast that April couldn't see where it ended. The mansion was immense. 3 stories of beige stone and huge windows, surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens with fountains and marble sculptures. It looked like something out of a movie about old European wealth, completely out of place in suburban America. April got out of the car, feeling absurdly out of place in her old jacket and worn jeans. The front door opened before she could ring the bell. Alessandro was there, wearing tailored pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He seemed more relaxed than the night before, but there was still that dangerous energy hovering around him like an invisible force field. "April," he greeted her, motioning for her to come in. "Welcome to my home." The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Marble everywhere, crystal chandeliers hanging from high ceilings, paintings that looked too old and valuable to be real. April followed Alessandro down a series of hallways until they reached a sun-filled living room where Chiara was sitting on the floor playing with wooden blocks. When Chiara saw April, her whole face lit up. "April?" she cried in halting English, running to her and wrapping her arms around April's legs. April knelt down and hugged the girl, feeling the same inexplicable tightness in her heart. "Hi, little one," she said softly. Alessandro watched the interaction with that same intense expression. "She's been talking about you since she woke up," he said, "asking when you would come." April felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She hadn't realized how much she needed to feel needed until that moment. For the next 3 weeks, April immersed herself in the new rhythm of her life. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, she took the Mercedes to Alessandro's mansion. She spent the day with Chiara, playing, reading stories, teaching her English words, and learning Italian words in return. Slowly, the gloomy, inconsolable girl April had met that first night at the restaurant began to disappear. Chiara began to smile again, to laugh, to run around the house with the wild energy of a 3-year-old who had been freed from an invisible prison of sadness. April found that she loved the job. She loved seeing Chiara's transformation. She loved the moments when Chiara would snuggle into her lap during story time, sucking her thumb, completely confident and secure. It was more rewarding than anything April had ever done. But there were complications. Alessandro was always around. He worked in his home office most days and often popped in during the day to check on Chiara. He watched April with that piercing gaze, as if trying to solve a complicated puzzle. And April began to realize that she was watching him too. She saw the way Alessandro was with Chiara when he thought no one was looking, how he completely softened, his voice becoming gentle and sweet when he spoke to her in rapid Italian, how he held her as if she were the most precious thing in the universe, how he stayed up late into the night just sitting in her room, watching her sleep, as if afraid she might disappear if he looked away. Alessandro Morone was dangerous. April knew it in her bones. But he was also a devoted father who had lost the woman he loved and was desperately trying to keep his daughter whole. And somehow, that vulnerability made him more attractive than any man April had ever known. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus only on Chiara, but it was impossible to ignore the way April's pulse quickened when Alessandro entered the room, the way her skin tingled when their fingers accidentally touched, the way she found herself thinking about him at night, wondering what it would be like if those strong arms held her. But there was more than physical attraction. April began to notice little things, the way Alessandro always asked if she had eaten before starting work, how he remembered details she mentioned casually, that she liked chamomile tea, that her grandmother loved white lilies. One day, April found a bouquet of white lilies at the entrance to the mansion with a simple card, "For your grandmother, A." These gestures disarmed her in ways her physical beauty never could. They showed that he was paying attention, that he cared, and that scared April more than anything because it meant that what she felt wasn't just a passing desire. It was something deeper, more dangerous. She began to question herself during the long nights in her apartment. What was she doing? She couldn't fall in love with Alessandro Morone. He lived in a world completely different from hers, a world of violence and secrets and constant danger. Even if he felt something for her, and April wasn't sure he did, what could come of it? She would just be another responsibility for him to protect, another target for his enemies. But then she would return to the mansion and see the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. that intense, hungry look that made her stomach flutter, and she saw how he made excuses to be near her, checking on Kiara more often than necessary, asking April's opinion on trivial things, staying in the room when she and Kiara were playing. The tension between them grew every day, unspoken, unacknowledged, but palpable like electricity in the air before a storm. And then, on a Friday afternoon at the end of the third week, everything changed. April was in the garden with Kiara, pushing her on the swing Alessandro had installed. Kiara laughed every time the swing went high, shouting, "Higher, higher," in Italian, mixed with English. The sun was beginning to set, casting everything in golden and orange light. Alessandro came out of the house and stood on the back porch, watching them. April felt his gaze before she saw him. She turned her head, and their eyes met across the distance. There was something different in his gaze today, something determined, as if he had come to some important conclusion. He slowly descended the steps, walking toward them. "Chiara, cara mia, it's getting late," he said. "It's time for dinner." Chiara protested, but only for formality's sake. She was obviously tired, her movements becoming slower and dreamier. April picked her up from the swing and set her down on the ground. Chiara immediately took April's hand and Alessandro's hand, swinging between them as they walked back to the house. They looked like a family. The realization hit April out of nowhere, taking her breath away. They looked like mother, father, and daughter, coming home after a perfect day. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. After Chiara was in bed, April got ready to leave, as she always did. But Alessandro stopped her at the front door. "Stay for dinner," he said. It wasn't a question. April knew she should refuse. She knew that crossing this line was dangerous. But she was also tired of pretending she felt nothing. "Okay," she said. They dined in the formal dining room, at a huge table that could easily seat 20 people, but was set for only 2. A chef April had never seen before brought out course after course of incredible Italian food. Red wine was poured into crystal glasses. Candles were lit. It was absurdly romantic, and April couldn't stop feeling like she was in a dream. "Tell me about yourself," Alessandro said, leaning back in his chair, studying her over his wine. "I know you work 2 jobs. I know you live alone in the Bronx, but I don't know anything else." April hesitated. She didn't like talking about herself. But there was something about the way Alessandro asked, genuinely interested, not just polite, that made her open up. "There's not much to tell," she said. "My mother abandoned me when I was 5. My grandmother raised me. She's sick now in a nursing home. I work to pay for her care." Alessandro frowned. "Your parents?" "I never knew my father. My mother, she wasn't ready to be a mother. She had drug problems. One day she just left and never came back." April shrugged, as if it were no big deal, but the old pain was still there, buried deep. "So you understand," Alessandro said softly, "what Chiara is going through. You really understand." "Yes," April admitted. "I understand." They were quiet for a moment. Then Alessandro said, "I also grew up without a mother. She died when I was 8. Cancer." He took a sip of wine. "My father raised me. He was strict. He taught me that men don't cry. That emotion is weakness. He trained me to take over the family business from a very young age." Alessandro paused, his eyes becoming distant. "I promised myself I would be different with my children, that I would let them feel, that I would be kind." "You're a good father," April said, and she meant it. Alessandro looked at her, and there was something raw and vulnerable in his gaze. "I'm trying. But since I lost Isabella, I don't know if I'm doing anything right." "Isabella," April repeated. "Your wife?" "Yes." Alessandro's voice was rough. "She died 6 months ago. A bomb attack. It was meant for me, but she was in the wrong car at the wrong time." He clenched his jaw. "Chiara was with me that day, otherwise she would have too." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The horror of what almost happened hung between them like a dark cloud. "I'm sorry," April whispered. "It's not your fault," Alessandro said. "It's mine. My life, my choices led to this. Isabella knew who she was marrying, but Chiara, she didn't ask for any of this." He looked at April directly. That's why I need you. You give her something I can't. Some semblance of normalcy, some chance to just be a child. April felt tears burning in her eyes. I'll do anything for her, she said. She deserves to be happy. Yes, Alessandro agreed. Then, more softly, and you? Do you deserve to be happy, April? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. I don't think about it much, she admitted. Maybe you should, Alessandro said. He was quiet for a moment, seeming to struggle with something internally. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost hesitant, a quality April had never heard from him before. I need to tell you something, and you may hate me for it. April's heart raced. What? I shouldn't feel this way, Alessandro said, his hands tightening around the wine glass. My wife died just 6 months ago. I should be grieving. I should be focused only on Chiara, but every time you walk through that door, all I can think about is you. He met her eyes, and the raw intensity there nearly knocked her off her feet. You haunt me, April Bush. Your laughter when you play with Chiara, the way you bite your lip when you're focused, the kindness in your eyes, when you look at my daughter, as if she's the most precious thing in the world. April couldn't breathe, she couldn't think. All she could do was stare at him as he opened his heart. I know it's wrong, Alessandro continued, his voice growing hoarse. I know I have no right to feel this way, but I can't stop. And if you want to leave, if this makes you uncomfortable, I'll understand. I'll find someone else to take care of Chiara. But I needed to tell you. I needed you to know. April felt tears burning in her eyes. For weeks she had fought against her own feelings, convinced she was alone in them. But now, hearing Alessandro confess that he felt the same, something inside her broke. All the walls she had built, all the self-censorship, everything came crashing down at once. You're not the only one who feels this way, she whispered. Alessandro froze. What? I think about you too, April admitted, the words coming out in a rush now that she had started. Every night when I go home, every morning when I wake up, I know I shouldn't. I know it's complicated and dangerous and probably a terrible idea, but I can't stop. She wiped the tears from her cheeks. You scare me, Alessandro. What you do, the world you live in, all of it terrifies me. But when I'm with you, when I see the way you love Chiara, the way you try to be better for her, I see someone who deserves to be happy too. Alessandro stood up so abruptly that his chair nearly tipped over. He walked around the table until he was standing close to her, and April looked up at him, her heart pounding wildly. I don't want to hurt you, he said, his voice rough. But if you let me touch you now, I won't be able to stop. April stood up, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Then don't stop, she whispered. Alessandro reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with a tenderness that contrasted completely with the intensity in his eyes. Are you sure? Once we cross this line, there's no turning back. April covered his hand with hers, turning her face to press a kiss to his palm. I'm sure. And then, before either of them could reconsider, Alessandro leaned in and pressed his lips against hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he were giving her the chance to pull away. But April didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her hands rising to curl into his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more desperate. Alessandro lifted her out of the chair, his arms wrapping around her waist as he pressed her against him. April forgot where she was. She forgot all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. All that mattered was the feel of Alessandro's lips on hers, the strength of his arms, the heat of his body. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing heavily. Alessandro rested his forehead against hers. I shouldn't have done that, he said. But you did, April whispered. And I'll do it again, he admitted, unless you tell me to stop. April knew she should tell him to stop. She knew it would complicate everything. But when she looked into Alessandro's eyes and saw the raw, naked desire there, she couldn't form the words. Don't stop, she said. And he didn't. They made love that night in Alessandro's master suite, a huge room with a gigantic bed covered in silk sheets. It was intense and passionate, and unlike anything April had ever experienced. Alessandro touched her as if she were precious, as if she mattered, as if he had been waiting for her his whole life. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Alessandro's chest rising and falling beneath April's cheek. "Stay tonight," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "Okay," April whispered, and for the first time in years, she felt completely safe. The following weeks were like a delirious dream. April continued to come 3 days a week, but now it wasn't just about taking care of Chiara. It was about Alessandro, too. They stole moments together whenever they could. Quick kisses when Chiara wasn't looking. Rushed sex in his office while Chiara took her afternoon nap. Late dinners where they talked for hours about everything and nothing. April was falling in love. She knew it was dangerous. She knew she should protect her heart. But it was too late. She had fallen hard and completely for Alessandro Moroni and his daughter. But there were strange moments that April couldn't quite understand. Phone calls that Alessandro answered in rapid, angry Italian, his voice turning cold in ways that made April's blood run cold. Conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered the room. And once, she had seen Alessandro arguing intensely with one of his men about the old viper. She was sure she had heard that, even though they had changed the subject immediately when they noticed her presence. There was also the strange fact that Alessandro never mentioned Isabella's family. April knew she had been Italian, that she had grown up in that world, but Alessandro never talked about her parents or siblings. It was as if Isabella's family had been completely erased from the narrative. April had asked once, casually, and Alessandro had tensed. "Her family didn't approve of our marriage," he had said curtly. "We grew apart before Chiara was born. It's better this way." But there was something in the way he said it, too quick, too final, that made April think there was more to the story. Still, she didn't press. Everyone had secrets, and Alessandro had been open about the most important parts of his life. The rest could wait. And then, on a cold Tuesday in November, it all fell apart. April had just put Chiara down for her nap when she heard the sound of glass breaking downstairs. Her heart skipped a beat. Alessandro was at a meeting in Manhattan and wouldn't be back for hours. The guards who usually patrolled the property were strangely absent. April had thought it odd, but hadn't questioned it. Now she wished she had. She heard voices, men shouting in Italian, the sound of furniture being knocked over, and then heavy footsteps on the stairs. Terror froze April to the bone. She ran to Chiara's room, locking the door behind her. Chiara was still asleep, oblivious to the danger. April looked around desperately for anything she could use as a weapon. She grabbed a heavy lamp, ripping it from the wall. The doorknob turned. Someone knocked on the door. "Open up," a voice growled in heavily accented English. April pressed her body against the door, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would explode. "Go away," she shouted. "Hand over the girl and we'll leave," the voice said. Understanding flooded April like cold water. They had come for Chiara, to kidnap her, to use her against Alessandro. "No," April said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You're not going to touch her." There was a pause, then the violent kick. The door shook but held. Another kick. The wood began to crack. April looked at Chiara, who had woken up and was sitting on the bed, her eyes wide with fear. "April," she whimpered. "It's okay, sweetie," April said, even though she knew it was a lie. "Come here." Chiara ran to her, and April picked her up, holding her tight against her chest. She backed into the far corner of the room, placing herself between the door and the child. The door burst open with a final crash. 3 masked men stormed into the room. They were large, muscular, dressed in black from head to toe. The leader pointed at April. "Hand over the girl." "No," April said, her voice surprisingly firm. The man took a step forward. April raised the lamp, swinging it with all her strength. She hit him on the side of the head and he staggered backward, cursing in Italian. But the other 2 moved faster. One of them wrenched the lamp from her hands. The other tried to grab Chiara. April fought like a wild animal. She kicked, scratched, bit, she screamed until her throat was raw. But she was outnumbered and outmatched. One of the men managed to pull Chiara from her arms. Chiara screamed, reaching her little hands out to April. "April! April!" "No!" April screamed, lunging forward to grab Chiara back. The crack of the gunshot was deafening in the confined space. Pain exploded in April's side, sharp and burning. She looked down and saw blood blooming on her shirt, spreading quickly. She had been shot, but she didn't fall. The adrenaline pumping through her veins kept her on her feet. She staggered forward, grabbing the man holding Chiara and biting his hand hard enough to draw blood. He screamed, letting go of Chiara. April grabbed the girl and ran to the closet, pushing Chiara inside and blocking the entrance with her body. "Take me," April gasped, blood soaking through her shirt. "Take me instead. I'll cooperate. Just leave her alone." The men hesitated. Then, from somewhere downstairs, came the sound of sirens and more shouting. Reinforcements had arrived. Alessandro's guards, or perhaps the police. The leader cursed. "Let's go," he barked at his companions. "We don't have time." They fled, leaving April bleeding on the floor of Chiara's bedroom. April felt her legs give way. She slid to the floor, her vision blurring at the edges. "Chiara," she whispered, "are you okay?" Chiara crawled out of the closet, tears streaming down her face. "April! April! No!" She threw herself on top of April, her small sobs tearing at April's heart. "It's okay," April murmured, though she wasn't sure if it was true. "You're safe. That's all that matters." The last thing she heard before darkness took her was Alessandro's voice, hoarse with panic, shouting her name. April woke up in the hospital 3 days later. Her side was tightly bandaged and hurt like hell, but the doctors said she had been lucky. The bullet had grazed her, missing any vital organs. She would make a full recovery. Alessandro was sitting at her bedside, looking as if he had aged 10 years. There were dark shadows under his eyes, and his stubble was longer than April had ever seen it. When he realized she was awake, relief flooded his face. "April," he breathed, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips. "Grazie a Dio. I thought I was going to lose you." "Chiara," April managed to say, her throat dry. "She's fine," Alessandro quickly assured her. "Thanks to you. You saved her life." "You almost died for her." His voice broke. "You didn't have to do that. It wasn't your job. It wasn't your responsibility." "Yes, it was," April interrupted him. "I love her. I love her as if she were my own." Alessandro closed his eyes, and when he opened them again they were wet. "You deserve to know the truth," he said. "The complete truth about who I am and what I do." "I already know," April said softly. "I've always known." "No," Alessandro said. "You know bits and pieces. But you don't know everything." He took a deep breath. "My name is Alessandro Morone, and I am the head of the Morone family, one of the most powerful crime organizations on the East Coast. I control drugs, weapons, illegal gambling, extortion. I've done terrible things, April. Things that keep me awake at night. I have blood on my hands that will never wash away." April listened silently, her heart heavy. Isabella, my wife, she knew. She grew up in this life. Her family was in the business too. But even so, the enemies I made got to her. They put a bomb in her car as revenge against me. And now they've tried to get Chiara. Alessandro squeezed her hand. "That's why you need to leave. That's why you need to run as far away from me as you can and never look back." "No," April said. Alessandro blinked. "What?" "I said no," April repeated, louder this time. "I'm not going anywhere." "April, you almost died." "I know," she interrupted him, "and I'd do it again. I knew from the first night that your life was dangerous. I'm not stupid, Alessandro, but I chose to stay anyway because what I feel for you and Chiara is greater than my fear." She squeezed his hand. "You can't get rid of me that easily." Alessandro looked at her as if she were a miracle. "You're crazy," he whispered. "Probably," April agreed. "But I love you, both of you. And love means staying even when it gets hard." Alessandro pulled her into a desperate kiss, careful not to hurt her. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone again." "Then stop trying to push me away," April said, "and let me stay." Alessandro nodded, tears finally escaping and sliding down his cheeks. Okay, you can stay." 3 weeks later, when April was fully recovered, Alessandro took her to a fancy restaurant overlooking Central Park. Chiara was with them, wearing a pretty blue dress, happily swinging her legs in her high chair. After dinner, Alessandro knelt beside April's table. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a breathtaking diamond ring. "April Bush," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "You saved my daughter. You saved me. You brought light back into our lives when I thought we would be lost in darkness forever. Will you marry me? Will you officially become Chiara's mother and my wife?" April looked at Chiara, who was clapping her hands and shouting, "Yes, yes," even before April could answer. She looked back at Alessandro, at this beautiful, broken, dangerous man who loved her, despite everything. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face, 1,000 times yes. Alessandro slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss as the entire restaurant erupted in applause. 3 years passed. April was standing in the kitchen of her new home. Not the mansion, but something smaller and cozier that she and Alessandro had chosen together, preparing breakfast. Her stomach was round and heavy with her third child, expected to arrive any week now. "Mama! Mama!" Chiara came running into the kitchen, now 6 years old and full of radiant energy. "Gabriele took my doll. Gabriele Morone, give your sister's doll back," April called. A 2-year-old boy with dark curls and Alessandro's eyes appeared around the corner, holding the offending doll. "Sorry, Mama," he said in Italian, handing it to Chiara. April smiled, rubbing her belly. Her life was chaotic and sometimes frightening. She had learned to live with security guards and constant surveillance, knowing that Alessandro's job meant danger was always lurking. But it was also full of love, more love than she had ever imagined possible. Alessandro entered the kitchen wearing jeans and a t-shirt, his hair still messy from sleep. He wrapped his arms around April from behind, resting his hands on her belly. "Good morning, amore mio," he murmured, kissing her neck. "Good morning," April said, leaning against him. "Papa! Papa!" Chiara and Gabriele ran up to them, and Alessandro bent down to hug them both, laughing as they knocked him to the floor in a pile of hugs and kisses. April looked at her family, her real family finally, and felt a gratitude so deep it hurt. But there was a secret April didn't know, a secret Alessandro carried alone, heavy as stones in his pockets. On the night of the attack on the mansion, Alessandro had discovered something that changed everything. He had tracked down the men who had tried to kidnap Chiara. He had captured their leader and interrogated him personally. And what the man revealed under torture had made Alessandro's world stop. The men had not been sent by a rival Mafia family. They had been sent by Isabella's mother, Chiara's grandmother. Donna Vittoria Rossi had always blamed Alessandro for her daughter's death. And in her unbalanced grief and consuming hatred, she had decided that the best revenge would be to take away what he loved most, Chiara. She had planned to kidnap the girl, raise her as her own daughter away from Alessandro, make him suffer the same way she had suffered. That was why the guards had disappeared that day. Vittoria had old connections in the Mafia, favors she had saved for decades. She had used them all to orchestrate that attack, to create a window of opportunity where Chiara would be vulnerable. Alessandro had dealt with Donna Vittoria the only way he knew how, quickly, permanently. She was no longer a threat, but the weight of that secret, that he had killed Chiara's grandmother, that he had taken the life of someone else who loved the girl, even if in a twisted way, haunted Alessandro every day. He would never tell April. He would never put that burden on her. It was his to carry alone. But sometimes in the depths of the night, when he lay next to April and watched her sleep, he wondered if she would still love him if she knew the whole truth. If she would still choose him. He would never know. And maybe that was for the best. Because some truths were too heavy to share, and some lies were necessary to protect the people you loved. Alessandro kissed April's forehead as she slept, whispering the words he could never say aloud. "I'm sorry for what I had to do, but I would do it all again to keep you safe. Always." And in that silent promise, in the deep darkness of her room, Alessandro Morone made peace with the monster he was. Because love doesn't always mean being good. Sometimes love means being monstrous to protect what is most precious. and Alessandro loved his family more than his own soul. Thank you for sharing this moment with us. Every story I tell is crafted with dedication and affection, with the intention of touching the hearts of those who listen. If this narrative has awakened something in you, please consider subscribing so we can continue this journey of telling moving stories together. Your support is essential for us to continue sharing these unique experiences. Warm regards, and see you in the next story.